Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. My name is Steve Fielding. All the stories are taken from my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record, covering every execution in Great Britain and Ireland between 1868 and 1964. Copies of these and many of my other titles can be obtained through my website, stevefielding.com. If you enjoy the video, can you please press like and subscribe to the channel, and if you can spare £1 or two to help it to continue to grow by clicking the thanks button on the YouTube video or the link paypal.me/thehangmansrecord, that will be greatly appreciated. And, as always, use the comments below for your thoughts on the case, whether justice was seen to be done, and suggestions for future episodes in this series. Today's tale from the Hangman's Record takes us back to the autumn of 1950. King George VI is on the throne, and the year sees Labour leader Clement Attlee win his second term as Prime Minister. In America, 33rd President Harry S. Truman is into the 5th of his 8-year tenure. In Great Britain, the country is still adjusting to the aftermath of the Second World War, with Corby in Northamptonshire becoming the first new town to be created as the house building programme expands across the country. Petrol rationing finally ends, although food items such as meat, butter, sugar and sweets would all remain rationed for a few more years. In popular culture, the Ealing film The Blue Lamp is one of the most successful movies of the year, and on the radio, the first episodes of The Archers and Listening with Mother are broadcast, and Andy Pandy makes its first appearance on TV. It was a year that saw 2 controversial executions that would later see Timothy Evans pardoned and the conviction against George Kelly, hanged in Liverpool for the Cameo Cinema murder, quashed. And in the north of England, wartime grievances between 2 Yugoslavs would see one man being found battered to death and the other ending his life on the hangman's rope. At first light on the morning of Monday, the 9th of October 1950, railway platelayer Alva Howarth was making his way to work. Howarth was a foreman of a gang tasked with maintaining the Accrington to Bury stretch of the East Lancashire Railway. Before starting the shift, Howarth and the team would rendezvous in a trackside cabin, a small wooden hut situated beside the embankment, a few feet from the main railway line close to the village of Ewood Bridge. The hut was Spartan, containing just a stove for making their morning cups of tea and a few chairs around a crude table where they would occasionally take lunch. It was mainly where they stored some of the tools used on the railway. On entering that morning, Howarth noticed the body of a man lying face down on the cold floor, his head towards the fireplace. He dashed from the cabin to summon help from his superior, William Crook, who lives close by. Crook immediately contacted the police at nearby Ramsbottom. A police constable hurried to the hut and, confirming that this was almost certainly a murder scene, put a call through requesting the attention of CID detectives. The officer in charge of the investigation was Detective Chief Superintendent Cecil Lindsay, the head of Lancashire CID, assisted by Chief Superintendent Platt. Together with James Firth, head of the Forensic Science Laboratory at Preston, and Dr. George Manning, the Home Office pathologist, they made their way to the lonely spot. As news quickly spread, journalists from local papers throughout the region jostled with curious onlookers keen to see the police in action as they tried to solve the mystery. Their first task was identifying the body. Pressed for information, Superintendent Lindsay told the press, "We are making an extensive search to discover the man's identity. His injuries suggest he was a victim of foul play." The examination revealed that the man had sustained severe trauma that included 9 wounds to the head, along with bruising around both eyes. The skull had been fractured, which had resulted in his death. As officers combed the surrounding area in search of clues, they learned that a Yugoslav man had failed to arrive the previous day for Sunday lunch at the small hamlet of Edenfield. Later that night, his girlfriend, Anika Miluznic, identified the body, and detectives were able to confirm that the dead man was a Yugoslav refugee, Radomir Djorovic. 26-year-old Djorovic had arrived in Britain in January 1948 and was employed at the Sun paper mill at Fenniscowells near Blackburn. Investigations into his movements prior to his death revealed he had planned to spend the previous afternoon at nearby Edenfield, having Sunday lunch with other Yugoslav refugees. Both Djorovic and another intended guest had failed to show. Detectives soon had a prime suspect. Officers went to a lodging house at 3 Caton Street in the Mill Hill area of Blackburn and found that 29-year-old Nenad Kovasevic, a friend of the dead man, had fled. Chief Superintendent Lindsay issued a statement saying they were anxious to interview Kovasevic, a 29-year-old Yugoslav who had arrived in England in December 1947. Kovasevic had worked at the same paper mill as Djorovic, but was now working as a builder's labourer. A description of the wanted man was released to the press and a wanted notice posted at police stations throughout the region. Kovasevic was described as 6 foot 3 inches tall, with broad shoulders, brown hair and possibly a pencil-type moustache and a rather large nose. He was believed to be wearing a brown suit, cream shirt and collar, brown tie, brown shoes and hat, and spoke poor English. Detectives soon learned that the wanted man had gone to Blackpool to catch a coach to London, as the Blackpool to London bus only ran once a week and was fully booked. Investigations in Blackpool found that on Tuesday morning, Nenad Kovasevic had left on the London-bound bus. Armed with information that the fugitive was on the London-bound coach, Lindsay radioed ahead to detectives in the Midlands, who arranged to set up a roadblock and intercept it. The coach was scheduled to call at Newcastle-under-Lyme, Staffordshire, but when detectives called, they found they had missed a connection by a matter of minutes. Investigations found that Kovasevic had visited a cafe there before reboarding the coach. Acting on this information, 2 police officers intercepted the coach at Cannock bus station. Officers boarded the coach and arrested Kovasevic on suspicion of murder. Lancashire police were informed and 3 officers, including Detective Chief Superintendent Lindsay, hurriedly made their way to Cannock. Kovasevic was interviewed for several hours by both the Cannock and Lancashire police before being held in custody as arrangements were made for his return back north. Later that evening, towering over the policeman, the Yugoslav was handcuffed and escorted to a waiting car, and with an officer either side, they made their way back to Ramsbottom. At Ramsbottom police station, Kovasevic initially denied any part in the murder and said he had spent the afternoon with his Hungarian girlfriend, Lisa Sagbert. He was shown a number of items taken from his lodgings which belonged to the murdered man, and at first made no comment, but then broke down and said he was sorry he had killed his friend. Lindsay then formally charged him with the willful murder of his fellow countrymen. On Wednesday the 11th of October, Kovasevic appeared before magistrates at Bury, where they heard all the evidence so far collected by the police, including the statement Kovasevic had made when questioned by Detective Chief Superintendent Melling. Nenad Kovasevic, 3 Caton Street, Blackburn, 10th of October 1950. I want to tell my story. I am sorry I killed Jack. I called Djorovic Jack. He was my friend. I was crazy to do it. I was going to see my girl and found a girl for Jack. I mean, only one girl I knew in Italy 2 years ago. I was going to be Jack's girl. Liza was my friend now. We came to Edenfield from Accrington Sunday. About 11 o'clock bus Accrington and walked down the road to near Mill and through village onto Railway Road. It came on rain and Jack and I went in railway cabin to shelter. He had angry words about me and the girl and made me angry. He something says to me about war in Yugoslavia. I think I must go crazy because I pick up axe and hit him with it. He fall and I hit him again with axe on ground. Then I take his coat to put on and gloves and cigarette case in pocket. I take no money, no. I leave cabin and go back to Blackburn on bus from Haslington to Accrington. Same night I went home, then go into town and meet Lisa and Lisa's friend called Bella. I gave Bella a cigarette case. I have awful trouble. My family all killed or dead, and only my mother at home in Yugoslavia. My little girl, 13, she dead. I get nerves. 3 months ago I say to Liza she must marry me or I go crazy because I have no one. Now I have killed my friend. The The trial of Radomir Djorovic began before Mr Justice Austin Jones on Thursday, December the 7th, 1950, at Manchester Assizes. The prosecution's case was that the murder was premeditated, the motive being that Kovasevic was short of money. Items found in his room proved to have been stolen from the victim, and his landlady testified that had been unable to pay his rent on the Saturday before the murder, but at 5 o'clock on Sunday, with Djorovic lying dead in the cabin, Kovasevic had paid off some of the arrears. Later that Sunday night, he took his girlfriend Liza and her friend Bella out and spent money in a lavish style, and after escorting both girls home in a taxi, he gave Bella a cigarette case, identified as belonging to Djorovic. Kovasevic had then fled to London in the hope of avoiding arrest. Mr Kenneth Buck, who led for the defence, put forward a plea of guilty of manslaughter brought on by intense provocation. Kovasevic's account of the events of the day were very different to that of the police and was to earn him considerable support. The court heard that on Sunday the 8th of October, as rain clouds filled the black skies over the bleak West Pennines Moor, the two men had set out from their Blackburn homes for Edenfield, a small hamlet several miles away, where two sisters, also Yugoslavs, had promised to cook them Sunday lunch. The men set across the moors and decided to speed up the journey by taking a shortcut down the railway line. As they approached Ewood Bridge in the heart of the Rossendale Valley, the heavens opened up and spying a small trackside hut in the distance, they headed for shelter. As they waited for the downpour to end, Kovasevic's thoughts went back to 1943, 7 years to the day when his family had been cruelly massacred by the advancing German army. Kovasevic was serving in the army under General Mihailovic and had been away from home fighting the Germans. He had only learned of their fate weeks later. As he remembered, tears filled his eyes and he began to sob. Djorovic saw the sadness in his friend's face and asked what was up. When told, Djorovic scoffed and told him he had sided with the Germans. Djorovic had been a quisling or a traitor in Belgrade during the war and admitted he had sympathised with Hitler and helped the Germans to sniff out a number of resistance workers. Kovasevic seethed in anger. Djorovic continued taunting his friend and began to slap him about the head. Finally, Kovasevic lost control. I ruffled his hair, got hold of his arm and said we would have a fight. When asked the nature of the attack and how Djorovic had ended up motionless on the floor, Kovasevic explained that during the fight he had noticed an axe lying beside the door. I took it and hit him twice and he fell. Djorovic slumped to the floor, the blows having fractured his skull, killing him instantly. I was looking at him and I said to myself, my mother has lost everything, and today she has lost me. In reply to his counsel, Kenneth Buck, he said, yes, I did it, and I am very sorry, but I have to confess I did it. The prisoner, continued Mr Buck, had made no preparation for the crime, which was in no way planned, and although he admitted that it bore certain hallmarks of a premeditated attack, the truth was it had been done in a frenzy following taunts and blows. This had been a vicious fight, and the bruises on the prisoner's face when Kovasevic was arrested backed this up. Buck also claimed that although Kovasevic had taken a number of items from the dead man, he didn't do this deliberately, as the items had been in the victim's heavy raincoat which he had taken to avoid getting soaking from the heavy rain. He also added that although Kovasevic had been unable to pay his rent on Saturday, this was not a motive for murder, it was merely coincidental. Kovasevic said he had planned to report the murder on Sunday night, but had decided to visit a friend in London to ask for advice before going to the police. The prisoner was not attempting to escape, merely seeking legal advice before surrender. Kenneth Buck concluded by asking for sympathy, bearing in mind that his family had been massacred during the war. Asked to retire to consider their verdict, the jury, of 9 men and 3 women, took 85 minutes to find Nenad Kovasevic guilty of murder. Asked if anything to say before sentence was passed, the prisoner replied in English, I can't say anything, I killed him. He was then sentenced to death through an interpreter. There was a short delay in the translation when the interpreter couldn't find the equivalent for thence in the passage thence to a place of execution. There was no recommendation for mercy. Kovasevic took the news of his death sentence calmly and walked unaided out of the dock and down the steps to the cell below. There was an immediate appeal based on the judge's summing up, which his counsel claimed was biased in favour of the prosecution, but it was quickly rejected by a panel headed by Lord Chief Justice Goddard. Strenuous efforts were then made for a reprieve, with the ex-King Peter of Yugoslavia sending a telegram to the King asking for his help, also failed to stop the execution. Having reviewed the evidence, Home Secretary James Shooter Eade had already stated that there were not sufficient grounds to justify him recommending any interference and the law would take its course. Kovasevic, on being advised that his appeal had failed, spoke with the solicitor on the evening before his execution, arranging for his will to be written. In this, he left everything to Liza, and his final words were, "Look after Liza." He asked if he could see his girlfriend for one last time, and a taxi was sent to her home in Accrington, which took her to Strangeways for a farewell meeting. His 75-year-old mother had been expected to arrive in England prior to her son's execution, and accommodation was reserved for her and a friend at the YMCA on Peter Street, Manchester. However, the room was to remain unoccupied. Kovacevic's solicitor told the press, as soon as the appeal against the death sentence was dismissed, the permanent secretary of the Yugoslav embassy wrote to me saying that no difficulty will be placed in the way of the mother's visit to see her son in the condemned cell. At 9 o'clock on Friday the 26th of January 1951, Nenad Kovasevic was hanged. An inmate in the prison hospital at the time later confided that the execution was not without incident. The Yugoslav had had to fight all his life, and as Pierrepoint and assistant Herbert Allen tried to pinion his wrists, he kicked out and had to be dragged to the drop, fighting all the way. Herbert Harry Allen, the Birmingham-based assistant and namesake of the man who was to be one of the country's last two chief executioners, took part in just a handful of executions before his name was removed from the list at the end of 1951. A few hours after Kovacevic's execution, his solicitor received a telephone call from the man's mother, but she could not speak English and he was unable to know what she was saying. "I was asked to stand by from a call from Belgrade at 3 o'clock and it came through very clearly," he told the press. The woman, speaking in the Yugoslav language, mentioned the name Kovasevic several times and also my name, but I could make nothing of the message. The only available interpreter I could think of was in King Peter's flat in London, so I asked the exchange to divert the call there. 10 minutes later, I rang King Peter's flat, but I was told the call was never put through. There was no further message. A few days after the execution, a letter arrived at the solicitor's office. It had been sent by Kovacevic's wife in Yugoslavia, Annika. She wrote, "I am willing to leave for England at any time, but the authorities are not prepared to issue me a passport, as they have been advised by the Yugoslav embassy in London that the permit to come to England had been granted to Mrs. Maria Kovacevic." The letter said that his mother was too ill to make the journey. The solicitor replied that her husband had been hanged on January the 26th and that she had to apply to the Home Office for further information. Like all convicted murderers hanged at Strangeways, Nenad Kovacevic's body was buried within the grounds of the prison shortly after execution. Following a riot at the prison in the early 1990s, rebuilding work meant that the bodies of those buried in the grounds had to be exhumed. In 1991, the remains of 63 executed prisoners, of which 45 were identifiable, were cremated at Blakely Crematorium. The cremated remains were later reinterred in two graves at the adjacent cemetery. Plots C2710 and C2711 contain the ashes of those executed. It is not recorded what happened to the body of Radomir Djorovic. There was certainly a great deal of sympathy for Nenad Kovasevic following the massacre of his family during the war and the taunting by his fellow countrymen. But it was felt the provocation did not justify the severity of the axe attack, and thus clemency could not be shown. You'll be watching another tale from the Hangman's Record. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you don't already, can I ask you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be notified when new content is uploaded. So, until the next time, thank you and goodbye.